Hey everybody, I'm David Rice and welcome back to Dentistry Unmasked. I'm here as usual with,
Hey everybody, Pam Maragliano-Muniz. Dave, what is going on today?
all is good. The sun's out, sky's blue. It's not inordinately hot here in Florida. How's the Salem, Mass weather doing?
Oh my goodness, it was hot earlier, and of course we had a photo shoot earlier in the day, so I was melting outside with both
hmm
dogs in my arms trying to look like it wasn't terrible during a photo. So we'll see how that works out. But then we ended up with thunder and lightning and all the things. So we've had like the entire array today in Boston.
Yeah. I like that. Well, I'm pretty pumped for today.
Oh my
I'm a
gosh.
materials geek, so
I'm a materials geek and I'm just like a geek in general. And so if I might, can I just like gush for 1 second?
yes.
So our guest is like has literally no reason on this planet other than just being a good person. Has no reason on this planet to be as kind and supportive and encouraging as he's been to me. So he's been teaching at Tufts forever. And so I went to Tufts as a dental student, but went to UCLA. And so I never really felt like, per se, that I was like part of the Tufts Pros family. And like he didn't care. And he's like, no, no, no. Like he is the reason I'm board certified. Like, in fact, I might even say, don't hate me for this, is I probably got board certified so you could stop harping on me for not being board certified. And so I'm so thrilled because it's one of our dear friends and like one of my best mentors and just like one of my favorite people, Dr. Kenny Malament. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Pam.
So, okay, that all aside, another thing that's really special about you is the fact that you are known as kind of the ceramics guy. And so you have brought different types of ceramics into your practice. You've got research like, you know, more with more longevity than major universities have. And that includes your longevity with Emacs. And so a lot of people are still wondering if they should trust Emacs in second molar positions or trust Emacs, with, inadequate prep thin, like if you don't have the thickness or the material that you'd like to have. And people are opting for zirconia for those reasons. But you're here to tell us that that's not necessarily the case. Would you share some of your research with us?
Uh, well, my research has, let's see, 41 years,
Told you.
40,
Couple of
40,
years.
42 years. And it has 9,287 units in it, all broken down into different confounding variables. Because there is a difference between the conditions that you put ceramics into. But I've covered all the materials, including zirconia. And I have to say right now, I'm not against zirconia as a material. We use it. I don't think it's the best material by any chance whatsoever. I think that there's huge problems with it that nobody wants to talk about. But it's also a very inexpensive material that laboratories love because they can get a lot of units out in a day. And you can't argue against popularity. I mean, I have to debate a very well-known person who, by the way, has never practiced, but is a big name in the dental industry. I have to debate him this year at the Aesthetics Academy. And it's not that I don't use zirconia, I do, but I use it for complex cases. And every time I use it, I'm nervous. I'm always praying every night that I won't have problems because I do have problems. I have fractures, I have chipping, I have lots of problems. On implant reconstructions, if you put a titanium base, I've never seen a problem. That's the only way I would do an implant case is with a titanium base screwed in. And I've never had a problem with that. And of course, I have data. The problem when you study data is confounding variables. For instance, there's a difference between men and women. Women are a lot smarter. That's a big statement. And there's a difference between an anterior tooth and a posterior tooth. That's a big statement. There's a difference between what you cemented on. There's differences in every regard. And I've done clinical research, with my numbers, but I've also done clinical research with the team with Van Thompson and the late Diane Ricow and that whole team of all PhD engineers. So I'm very good at asking the dumb question. I'm very, very, very good at that. And so again, I can't imagine anyone really wanting to use Emacs, not Emacs, but zirconia on individual units. I think it's silly. I think it's certainly not aesthetic. And if you make it aesthetic by adding a lot of porcelain, they have not changed the inherent problems with zirconia and porcelain since its inception. No difference whatsoever. And you just don't see that in Emacs. Emacs is far more attractive. Yes, there are zirconias that are multi-layered. Ivoclar has a very, very beautiful one, but compared to Emacs, there's not even any question at all. So, Pam mentioned second molars. I think it's silly because zirconia restorations pop out because they don't easily cemented. And I know that there's all sorts of ways that people claim, but there's no research to support it. And they themselves claim and show that it isn't. So every time I have to cement the zirconia resin, I go through the sandblasting process and I do everything that they say, but they still pop off. And the most disturbing thing is you take an impression for one restoration and turn out that 4 zirconia crowns that one of my associates put in pop out with me. And that's the end of my day because I have to stop everything and re-cement them. So I don't trust zirconia at all for almost anything, except for complex cases on implants. So I guess that's a strong statement. So I'm not against zirconia. It's just not a great material. And everyone wants to make it a great material because that's what they use. And nobody wants to talk about anything that, that doesn't support their principal ideas. And that's how I feel.
There's not a lot to argue with there. So I think.
Oh, no, there would be a lot to argue. I mean, for instance, I'm going to start this lecture against this famous guy at the aesthetics. And I'm going to say, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Without data, it's very difficult to really have a statement. And I have zirconia in my database, but the problem is 3/4 of the time, I don't know which zirconia is actually being used. I prescribe a zirconia and the laboratory gives me back and I assume it's what it is. And then I find out when there's problems, oh, it wasn't that material at all. So I don't know half the time what material is what. And it's very difficult to put something in the database not knowing what the material is made of. It's a confounding variable that's very important. And although it's in my database, I can't tell you exactly what I'm studying. And since zirconia changes all the time, now everybody wants an aesthetic zirconia. Well, that's not dramatically stronger than Emacs, except you can't cement it properly. So again, I'm not against zirconia. I hope people don't throw mud at the computer screen. But bottom line is that's my opinion. And I have data that supports it. Without data, and by the way, there are no papers. The only papers that exist are systematic reviews. And I was one of Sig Sakransky's best students and best friends. We used to hike every weekend together. And I'd mooch meals off of Sig and his wife every couple of days because June was a great chef. But he would say you need 500 units in 5 years of anything. And without that, don't even waste your time. And systematic reviews are even a bigger waste of time because it's garbage in, garbage out. Without good controlled studies, you don't have any data. So the natural conclusion is there's no data that would support against this. And I respect it and understand it. I'll talk about that at my debate. But the bottom line is there's no data on zirconia. But everybody wants to use it because laboratories make a lot of money. It's a lot easier. And remember, we don't have the great technicians anymore. We just don't have them. There are no programs now that are being trained in the art that used to exist in Zurich and in Japan and Korea. These programs have all closed just about. So, where we sell a highly aesthetic product, but who's going to make it? And how do we know that it's in fact great and brilliant and aesthetic? So I have a lot of control with Emacs. I have a tremendous control. I have one of the great master technicians right in my office, right in the next room over there. And I produce a tremendous amount of work. So now you can ask me questions.
Well, you mentioned you have over 9,000 units in your database for Emacs.
No. In that's including Dicor, Instagram, Empress, and Zirconia is in there too, but it's not in this sheet. So in Emacs, I have 5,210 units. I have officially 43 failures, and a failure is a restoration that I cannot repair. It's not a chip. I can't polish it out. It's something I truly have to do over again. So out of 5,310 units, and this is 19 years, I started this project in 2005. I have only 49 true failures. So that comes to a percent of that's not publishable because you only publish with survival data. But the gross failure rate is 0.92%. All the other materials have a failure rate just about over 10. So this is data that you take to the bank. And now, of course, you have to break it down into the confounding variables. But the one thing I tell you about the database is truly important from the point of view of practice management. Pam, you should be lighting up. Out of all of that, I have 319 restorations that I've had to do over again, not because they broke, but because treatment plans change. And we're in a very good business because no matter how beautiful the restoration is, the restoration on next to it may very well need to be done over again. And in that case, so out of the 5,310 units, 319 I've had to do over again. And that tells you, and that's then taken out of the base because it's no longer in there anymore. The time factor would be part of the study for logistic regression or whatever. But bottom line is, Emacs is an extraordinary material. I mean, just absolutely extraordinary. And it's something you take to the bank. I make a lot of money. I'm not afraid of saying that. I make a lot of money because I don't have to pay for restorations to be done over again, over and over and over again. And I don't, patients stay in the practice. This practice is an old practice, and almost all the patients, most of the patients, have stayed in the practice. Now, that's something I will someday study more conclusively because I have this giant database of essentially almost 9,300 units. And I've lost patients. I need to study that story. I need to study that. As well, I need to study why I've had to replace them. By the way, another part of the data is out of the 5,310 units, and I do buy layer materials, I only have 10 chips. 10 chips. Now, in metal ceramics, which behaves pretty much like zirconia, feldspathic, and all of the materials, you get chips. You get lots of chips, and sometimes you have to do that. So in Emacs, essentially nothing. And that's an important factor as well. So it's creating data and having this information in front of me is a profound statement. And by the way, I've published 6, 7 papers on this topic. One of the papers won the Judson Hickey Award for the best science paper of the year in the Journal of Prosthetic Dentistry. So we take this statistics very seriously. Sig was a statistics maven. Now I have PhD statistics people from MIT working with me. And My wife is fabulous in statistics. She's fabulous at numbers. So she's sort of taken over the database with me, and has written some great papers. So everything I say has been published. It's not like I'm making any of this up. It's published already.
So, what would you attribute your secrets to your success? Obviously, there's a lot of criteria that go into a crown: treatment planning, prep design, material selection, cementation technique, all of those things. Like, where's the magic?
By the way, you speak very well, Pam. Very, very well. To get you on the big stage. You're being wasted on the little stage, but you speak great. First of all, I'm trained in Perio-Implant. And as a statement of that, I would say the most important factor of my success is the fact that I believe in periodontics. All my patients go through a very distinct initial preparation. I don't treat patients who are covered with biofilm. That's out of the question. I also make sure that the tissue is healthy before I get involved in my work. And if the restoration is too short, I'm going to have a periodontist apically reposition that. Or I might have, in today's world, the hygienist do a deep cleaning. I don't use lasers, although ENAP is a great procedure, but just by cleaning efficiently and sometimes using amoxicillin and metronidazole, that tissue will shrink and I will go from a short tooth to a longer tooth. Most of the time you have to recondition the bone to get a better position, but my tissue is healthy. And as a result of that, I have a longer tooth, a very healthy tooth, and making impressions is not very difficult. I'm not fighting anything. I see my margins. I'm not fighting anything. So biofilm maintenance and correct treatment is critical. Of course, Pam knows this better than anybody, but this has been the nature of my practice, and I'm very happy. I know that my mentors, Jerry Kramer, Sig, they would be very happy with the way I perform dentistry, because I don't perform dentistry any differently than I did when I finished graduate school. And at the American Board of Prosthodontics, I look at these questions. I look at these statements. By the way, if you can see what you're doing and you have an adequate tooth structure, you're not compromising resistance and retention form. You're not compromising almost anything. So, life is very good. So that being number one. Number two, I, for the most part, have always worked with etchable ceramics. Now, it was my paper that presented to DICOR that you would get a much better long-term survival having an etched DICOR with a resin cement as opposed to a non-etched and a classic cement, zinc phosphate, or the real glass ionomer cement. So I was sort of the first person to sort of introduce this topic that etchable ceramics and a resin cement is critical. Now today you have resin-based glass ionomer cements. They're essentially 98% resin. I don't care if you want to use it as long as you etch the etchable ceramic, in this case Emax. So I don't have any problem with that at all. And it doesn't make a difference. I don't believe in the hype that a lot of these cements have. It's all about whether or not they are etchable and can be inherently bonded. My cementation procedure is acid etch the dentin, gluma the dentin, and then dentin bond the dentin, and then cement my restoration on top of it. So that's important, how you cement. And also the question of, if you need root canal, do root canal. I don't think it's a real big, I don't see any reason to play experimental games. Some people say, well, if you acid etch and dentin bond, you don't need root canal. No, but if there's a flush, if there's blood coming out of the tooth, I do the root canal. I'm not here to play games. If something needs root canal, and we've published a paper, a really good paper, on the number of teeth in my database with Emacs and Empress that required root canal. It's an absolute joke. It's like 0.39, and that's the paper that won the award. I mean, I don't see a lot of endo. I know it exists. I myself had a tooth that needed a root canal, the first one I had, and it was under an Emacs grant. So I know it exists. It's just I don't play games. I'm not here to experiment. Again, it's all the question of relative risk, and I don't want to take any risk if I don't need to do it.
So I'm loving this because I think a lot of our audience are younger dentists. There's some dental students and some, practice owners. And so what I'm hearing from you is that we have to reduce the risk. I feel like a lot of times we feel like we treatment plan a crown and we're like rushed into it, regardless of their periodontal status. And we're rushed into this quick turnaround of these restorations, for whatever reason, whether it's production, practice management, patient expectations, et cetera. But if we, and David said this before, slow down to speed up, you're actually going to have better, more predictable, also outcomes that are supported by science. So sometimes we need to stop and think about that as we're moving forward on our patients.
Definitely. I agree with you completely. And it's going to improve your bottom line. Practice management means no remakes. And we have a patient coming in all the time for problems and problems and problems. That decreases your productivity. David, you have a question?
No, I'm just thinking to myself, to your point, Pam, we live in maybe a present society of dentistry where this generationally and the factors that are driving things in today's young dentist, where we're acting before we're stopping, taking a breath, thinking, making rational choices based on long-term data. And I love how you started this whole thing, Kenny, with like foundation. Like, I'm not going to make my life miserable and try to work in an environment that makes my life challenging. And I think if young dentists who are watching and listening to this, like, take a lesson. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And when we do this dentistry at a high level, although it may take us a little bit longer to get to that ideal result, we've got decades of results that last. And I'm in practice management, Pam. Our patients are a whole lot happier with us. They forget how fast it was done.
Patients to you.
Yeah.
If you have a happy patient, they're going to refer patients to you, lots of patients, and it just grows. Whereas if you have a patient and there's problems and there's more problems, they're not referring to you. It's just not going to happen. So, great dentistry is the cornerstone of our world. And the problem we have, I think, in the world today is we don't have as many experts as we had years ago. And people don't respect the specialties as well as they once did. And They don't refer patients to the specialists either. In my world, periodontists used to refer tons of patients to prosthodontics and to endodontists. And now everybody wants to have those same people in their practice. And that's not efficient. It's real, but you can forget about getting referrals, which then builds on productivity and work. It's really important, but I don't see that necessarily changing.
No, I couldn't agree more. So let's also get into the weeds a little bit. So let's talk about preparations and maybe your margin design. Like, do you have a favorite bird? Do you have something that, you kind of reach for that just, you might not even think about it anymore, but somebody who's listening is like, oh my gosh, I need to consider this for my practice to have better outcomes?
If you're asking me for the numbers,
no. I'm talking chamfer, shoulder. No, definitely not.
I use a chamfer, and I first defined my margin with essentially a feather prep. It's slightly curved, but a feather prep, like I did when I was a graduate student. That's how I was defined. And of course, then I was using copper bands. We don't do that anymore. But with that as a statement, there's a lot of people who believe they can cure periodontal problems with their own lasers and their own periodontal surgical procedures and their own without any training whatsoever. And that's a big problem. I mean, I see things, or now they do it digitally. They'll do it apically repositioning off of a guide that they've put, and no discussion of flap design, no discussion of whether it's full or split flaps, no discussion of how they suture it, no discussion of anything. They just want to get the thing done. And because it's, digitally created, they think that that's magic. I think it's crazy. I think it's really stupid, almost malpractice, because I've seen the results of some of this stuff. And, it's, to me, I just think the more we stay in line with classic perio biofilm maintenance, I think the better we're all going to be all the time.
I couldn't agree more.
I think I got off the question you were asking.
No,
Sorry.
no, you answered the question. We were talking about margin design, and but also you have to keep the tissue in mind. Absolutely.
So I feather first. I feather to define my margin. My definition of a great preparation is no blood. I don't want to see any blood at all. I tell my graduate students, no blood. And I don't care if the margin was subgingival. Okay, you prep subgingival at that point and then wait to see where the margin will heal to, or maybe you need perio. Big deal. That's not a problem to me. But my preparation, if you watch me prep, essentially bloodless. I kid my graduate students, when did you get your vampire's license? Because it's disgusting half the time, the stuff they show me. I prep teeth, there's no bleeding. Okay, if there's a restoration that's overhung and bad, it may bleed, and I take a little Hemodent, put it on, and it'll stop. That's the end of it. And there, once I have my feather, then I come in with a chamfer. And today, I'm using actually a pretty thick chamfer. Not that I go deep into the tooth with it, but a thicker burr creates no chatter. The burr is not shaking at all. And without chatter, my prep is very, very clean. And since I know where my margin is, I just go to it all the way around with a chamfer. I say 1.3, 1.4, maybe 1.5 is fine. And by the way, I have great data and have published papers. There's no difference in survival between a restoration that's under a millimeter or greater than a millimeter. None. No difference in long-term survival. And I have great data on that because I myself, I was lecturing in Berlin, and all of a sudden I'm showing reconstruction, raising vertical dimension, major perio, everything. And these people are shaking their heads. And then in the panel discussion, they sort of attacked me that I wasn't, I wasn't bonding the restorations, which were absurd because there was nothing to bond to. But two, why didn't I do partial coverage? So in a major paper, I presented the question of partial coverage versus complete coverage. There's no difference in long-term survival, no difference whatsoever. Now, remember one thing. That data, which we adjusted, anterior teeth almost never break. They may chip, but as far as a fracture goes, they almost never fracture. Very, very, and that goes all the way back to the 40 years that I've been studying, starting with Dicor. Anterior teeth almost never fail. They may chip, but they don't break. So if you're studying partial coverage and you have a good chunk of anterior, now you have to take that out because that's a confounding variable that's going to affect the statistics. But even with that, which is what we did, there's no statistical difference between a partial coverage and a full coverage. Now, saying that, I do tons of partial coverage restorations. I did it when I did it with gold. They were my favorite restoration, and I do it today. I don't do plastic teeth. I know that people love composite, and I'm not against it. It's just it doesn't last very long. And I know people will show, and I've debated the great Di Giudici and others. And even today, those same great people are milling pre-made composite resin cores instead of ceramics. And I said, Dietra and And all these other people said, well, why don't you just, it's more expensive to do a composite block. Why don't you save money, do an Emax block, and get a great restoration out of it that will certainly last a lot longer, because composite resins all leak in time. But ceramics doesn't. Ceramics stays the same. Maybe the margins will show a little issue, staining and stuff, because the margins are never perfect. But bottom line is, I don't understand. I just don't understand. It's like, it's like they have a beautiful dog that they love, and that dog can do nothing wrong. I know Pam
like
knows
Senorita. Yes, like Senorita.
or my son's dog, and it's just this is the way it goes. But you can't talk them out of it, because this is their baby, and I respect that. These guys can do things that I could never do, but on the other hand, I can make a lot more money than they can. I can be a lot more efficient than they can be, and because I use ceramics, and so I don't do very much posterior composite. Anterior composites we all have to do, but posterior I would rather do a ceramic inlay, charge effectively, or if patients really have trouble financially, I'd give it to them because it's so easy to do, and I prepare it. Very easy, make an impression next time, come back. And the only thing I might have to adjust is my contact areas, because that's going to define whether my margins fit perfectly or not. And I always take an x-ray to confirm that my margins fit.
I agree. I say take an x-ray before cementation and after cementation. You don't want surprises at hygiene. That's terrible.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about your prep design for partial coverage. We see on Instagram nowadays that a lot of people are bonding onlays to like flat old pancakes. Are you down for the flat old pancake preparation, or are you creating, bringing in classic prosthodontics to create some sort of retention and resistance?
Yeah, I think that, that came from Texas, and it's nice, blah, blah, blah. But I'm a classic resistance and retention form. Herb Schillingberg was a very good friend of mine. He has a beautiful book, but there's other books too. Classic, and I'm looking at the book right now. Classic, first of all, we almost always have an isthmus. You almost always have an isthmus, and usually you're doing a restoration not because it's a virgin occlusal surface, it's because there's interproximal decay. So I open up my interproximal first with a feather burr, super gingival, then I hit it with a chamfer, then I come in with my box, and then the most important part is at the margin, I hollow grind the margin down. Let's see, am I doing this right? Sort of margin down. So I create a little bit of a football. So essentially, I'm bonding entirely to enamel everywhere. And to show you the numbers, I've done 356 inlays. I have 5 failures. I've done 532 onlays. Now remember, posterior teeth get hit more, and I've only 10 failures. That's 0.01, 0.02. So the success with inlays and onlays, it's the easiest dentistry in the world to do. I prepare those really quick. I always put Gluma down before I provisionalize it. And then it comes back, and the only thing I have to be concerned with is my contact areas. Now, remember, I live in sort of an incredibly silly world. Having one of the great technicians right in your office makes a big difference. And so occlusions generally right on the number, and generally, I almost don't check occlusion until the very end. I always use artist foil to check behind and forward if I can. But I always know where my hold is with artist foil. I do that the same on the American board. I always check my contacts. Do I have, because I don't believe in articulating paper, even though I have the best and thinnest, I'm always going to check where my contact is. And then once I know where it is, after it's cemented and it's not an eggshell, then I'll check the occlusion. For the most part, it's right. But if I have to adjust a little bit, I adjust a tiny bit with a fine football diamond. I just adjust. And then, as Baldwin Marshak has always said, check your lateral excursions. Have the patient slide left and right and see whether or not you're hitting on an incline. That's what's going to break ceramics. And Baldwin's lecture on that story is just fabulous. So, and so I do that, and then if I make adjustments, I always polish out the defect, because Emacs you can polish out the defect. You can't polish out any defect in zirconia, and affecting your grinding is an effect on the potential damage and potential failure of that ceramic article.
I think that's something many dentists still don't understand on our ability to manipulate Emacs. Throughout the whole process, even on your ceramist side, their ability to embed, and pull color into Emacs if they would like to do that versus something that sits on top of zirconia, the ability to adjust occlusion and the surface texture that we have to compromise on. And like you said, the tails wag the dog a bit with zirconia and dentistry for maybe not the right reasons.
Well, Emacs, when you get into color factors, you can do just so much. Like the great Thomas Singh, one of the ways he did it, he managed it, he would just have a surface and he'd scratch out a part. So if you needed a little bit more color at the margin, at the cervical third, he would just make a scratch. We used to do the same thing with Dicor. We would add a little bit and then cut it back. And then we would just use what John McClain said. We'd put a little white at one point, a little yellow in the other, and just fill it up with fluorapatite, which is a glass ceramic. And just, you're essentially micro coloring, micro prepping the surface out, and it works great. And then I can get really, really detailed color without losing, as you just said, surface texture. Surface texture and line angles makes aesthetic dentistry. If you have good surface texture, if it's required, and you can have your strong line angles going to the trigone, it works great, and you'll get beautiful results.
This has been one of my favorite conversations, not because I'm biased, and I know that's what you're thinking, David, and everybody out there, and that's fine if you think that. I don't even care, because we talked about Senorita and we talked about classic prosthodontics. But
See,
here's, oh yeah, no, I could go on for days, but here's the thing. There's so many people that want to do the latest and the greatest, and there are really great materials out there, but we have to consider the tried and true, which includes research and material science and respecting the materials that you're using and using them properly. So, Kenny, the number of pearls that you dropped on us today is like next level. And I'm so grateful for you to share your time with us and to, share this message to our audience, because I think they need to hear it.
I'm not sure that there's a lot of new materials out there. I'm really not sure about that at all. I don't think zirconia has changed dramatically at all. I just listened to Irina Seiler give a lecture at the Academy of Prosthodontics, and she had no information whatsoever, none, zero. I mean, she's great, I love her, but there's nothing new. The only thing they're doing is weakening it. They're not making it better. What Ivoclar did, fusing 3 different colorants or different levels of translucency, that was remarkable, because all the other ones that claim they have it, those pieces are just glued together. Same way composite resin, when they have 3 different things, those are essentially glued together. It's not one monolithic material, which Ivoclar has been able to do. But even then, you have this, how do you color it properly? It's not simple. And, giving a color to a laboratory technician, unless they can see it and work with it, they have no clue really what's going on. So, I mean, it's not a problem posteriorly, but anteriorly, it's definitely a problem.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's so true. Well, I feel like, well, for starters, I'm so excited to be going to the aesthetics meeting because I cannot wait for this debate that you're going to participate in.
I'm not too excited. I'm excited. The lecture's already in the can, but I don't have a lot of time. And the big problem there is the fact that I'm debating a person who's anointed as God. And it's very difficult to debate people like that, because everybody wants to believe everything these people say. And again, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Of course, he's going to quote all this paper, but the paper's a gobbledygook. I mean, there's nothing that I'm not saying not to use zirconia. Fine, you want to use zirconia, you can do whatever you want. Emacs is never going to be really popular until they can make a hockey puck out of it. And Ivoclar has tried for years to do that. It hasn't happened yet. I know there's one in Korea, but lithium disilicate. When I write papers, they don't want me to use Emacs as a name. When I said, well, if you don't want me to use it, I'm not publishing in your journal because this is the material I worked with. There's a lot of right now. There's probably 5 or 6 lithium disilicates, but I don't know how they behave. I know 2 of them have been taken off the market because of failures. I know what I've worked with. And, people could talk all you want, but I don't want to have problems with my patients. I don't want to have problems with my work. I don't want to have problems with my laboratory. I don't want to come into my laboratory and say, oh, this restoration broke again. And can you do it quickly over again? I don't need those excuses. I just want to be able to do my work, be happy, and go from there. The Aesthetics Academy is incredibly good. The Academy of Prosthodontics meeting, which is really where you should be, that's extraordinary because there you really have time to discuss and do things. And you're dealing with the specialty community and the community of dentists who have already reached a higher academic standard. They've put a lot of effort into studies and work. So, I'm a past president of both organizations, and I really love all these people. They're great. But, I like to be surrounded by people who you really can debate with from a point of view of science, not as a point of view of religion. Religion, everything works. It's great. I love it. But does it work? As I said, I don't trust zirconia for 1 minute, not 1 minute. Every time I do, I have to pray to God that they're going to work, and it's not going to be problems. It's not going to be sensitivity. I just don't believe it. You can do whatever, you can say whatever you want to me, great, but I have a database. The database never lies to me. It can't.
Yeah.
Numbers don't lie.
I think that's a great way. Pam, I don't know how we race through all the time, like when we do this every single session, but there's science, emotion. One works, one might feel good for a little while, but it's really tough to argue with decades of data and the volume of units that you have done over 42 plus years it's just so impressive to me. And I'll second what Pam shared earlier. I mean, thank you for sharing this time with us. I look forward to every time I see you in front of a room and being a student and learning. 30 years later, I think I love being a student as much as probably more than when I was in dental school, but I love it as much as I did all those years ago. So Pam,
just remember one more point.
Yeah.
A lot of your audience is working in a corporate environment.
True.
They don't have the choices that you and I might have. They have to work in the most efficient way. And as I said, until Emacs is a hockey puck, it's not an efficient material that it's cheaper than zirconia. It really is per unit. It's a cheaper material to make. Certainly in my laboratory, I make out like a bandit with it. But the bottom line is it's not as commercially viable to a corporate world and all those people who work in there. And that's great. But it puts them, they're not able to do their best dentistry. And one has to, these are my graduate students who are going out into those worlds. And, I'm appreciative of that. So.
But then I would challenge those of you out there that are working in a corporate setting using materials that you don't necessarily believe in. Either number one, find the type of practice that'll allow you to practice how you'd like to, or number two, take some of this data and bring it to the powers that be, because you know what? You mentioned practice management. You know what sells, you know what corporations want to hear. They don't want to be paying for redos. They don't want to be having, sharing free hours of redos with these patients. And so bring this data, be a change agent, and bring, your practice and make dentistry a better place. And obviously, ultimately, it's for the patients and they deserve it. So I think that point was very, very well taken. Well, I am going to have to just throw it out there publicly. You just need to come back. We need to have you back and have this conversation again.
Pam, you're one of my dearest friends. I'm happy to help you anytime you want. No problem at all.
Oh
Ever.
my gosh. Well, thank you so, so much. This has been an absolute treat for me. It's always really good to see you. And
Thank
for
you too.
everybody, thank you. And for everybody out there, for Dentistry Unmasked, I'm Pamela Maragliano-Muniz with David Rice, and we will see you all next week. Have a good one.
Thank you, David.
Take care. Thank you, everyone, for watching or listening to the show this week. And thanks to our guests and sponsors on this episode.
Please check out our social media at Dr. Pamela_Maragliano and at Dental Economics Official.
Or you can check me out at Ignite DDS or at Dr. David Rice.
And go to dentaleconomics.com to receive dental economics. You can choose to receive DE in print or digitally, and you can also get the details of our Principles of Practice Management conference on our website.
If you have topics or guests or anything you'd like to talk about on the show, send us an email to dentistryunmaskedpodcast@gmail.com, and we will do our very best to make it happen. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.